Live. The Hangout on Air is now live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I am Christiana Ellis.
And I'm Mike Martine.
Tonight, we're going to be talking about Survivor Kaoh Rong, Episode 11. But before we get to that, we have a YouTube comment on last week's episode from the Whatever 2025 saying, I like how excited you are about this episode. I was too. It was just good. Awesome discussion as always. I didn't even think about the fact that Ty would have lost his idol if he would have done it differently. Thanks, guys. From Scott's point of view, he should have just played his idol before and he would have been good, and then Ty would have been forced to play his too or be gone. I'm so glad, though, Scott was too cocky about the idol. Have a great week. That's exactly right, of course, but that's the thing about this game is that, you know, when you have 20/20 hindsight, you spot those things. But he was just so sure that Ty was going along with the plan, where they were able to wait and see if the votes went their way before using their idol or not.
Yes, it was a awesome effect of the super idol.
Yeah.
Side effect almost.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of funny just now that, I mean, the super idol is essentially out of the picture, and yet it still got to play its part in the strategy. If not by being played, then at the very least having someone go out explicitly because they assumed that it would be played, and then it wasn't.
Yep.
It's kind of like the choice of doing nothing is nonetheless still a choice. But so in any case, this week's episode, I think, was maybe not quite as spectacular as last week's ended up being with the final outcome. But still some solid stuff happening here and some good stuff to talk about, I think. Did you have any general impressions you wanted to cover before we get into the blow by blow?
No, I'm just kind of scrolling through real quick, but
okay.
No, it was pretty much like you said. It was not nearly as exciting, but still interesting.
Mm-hmm. So we began the episode with a very similar scene to the beginning of the previous episode, with the exception that it was a completely different group of people that were all congratulating each other over the excellent move they had just made. In this case, obviously, it is Aubrey and Ty, very happy for each other. Joe also declares the move, quote, excellent. And Jason is very passive-aggressive about praising the beautiful move, but saying that, well, you'll never get rid of Ty now. And then he's saying, as a fan of Survivor, a beautiful play. As someone on the other side of the alliance, arr, like a pirate. I was amused by that. Now, I actually want to give Jason some credit here. You know, I say he's being passive aggressive, and I'm not taking that back exactly, but I also think that all things considered, with what had just happened, he handled it pretty well.
Yeah.
Given how dramatic his game had been set back by that surprise move by someone he thought he could trust.
Yep.
A lot of people would have totally freaked out or had a meltdown or something like that, and he held it together remarkably well, and so I think he's due some kudos for that.
Yeah, I thought he handled himself pretty well the whole episode.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think he is a much more engaging person and less unpleasant when he is not so cocky and arrogant.
Yep.
You know, he's been set back on his heels a little bit, and he is more tolerable that way.
Yes.
Yeah, so he is, and he has a good point too, just in the sense that Ty now, with having an idol and having this extra vote, there's only 6 people left. Well, I mean, there were 7 when he said it, but still, that's a substantial thing. But of course, as discussed later, it's also something that can make you a target.
Yep.
So in the meantime, we have, Jason and then the alliance that's happy, but then we also have Julia and Michelle saying, what just happened? Nobody told us? Why didn't you tell us? And, Julia, I think we can understand why she'd be annoyed, but at the same time, it's like, well, we didn't tell you because you were on their side to a large extent. So
Yeah.
it's like, I love that Ty kind of points out is like, she's complaining like, well, why didn't you tell us? And he's like, you voted for me. I loved that. It was just like, what? Oh, I'm sorry. I should have let you know. I owed you so much after all. So that they're both one thing that I thought was interesting though throughout the episode, and it seemed like a recurring theme, tell me if you picked up on this too, is that Julia was the one that always put her and Michelle in the same position, dealing with the same situation. And it seemed like Michelle really never put it like that. Like they were definitely close, but
yeah, Michelle acknowledged that she had been like with her from the beginning. I thought she called her closest ally at some point.
Well, she might have, but I guess what I just felt like I was picking up on is Julia seeming to always talk about them as if they're this unbreakable pair that's in exactly the same situation and will always do the same things together and feel the same way about everything. And Michelle did not reciprocate to that degree.
Yeah, I think it's been a couple episodes since she did call her closest ally, and she's probably been separating herself over the last couple.
Well, for sure. I mean, this skips ahead a little bit, but we saw when Michelle went on the reward, she seemed very eager to get back in the good graces of the rest of that group. To say, I know you left me out, and I'm going to accept your explanation for why that was, but I want it clear that I still want to be part of this group. Yeah. She seemed really determined to get that result and then followed through with it. Whereas Julia kind of considered herself on the outside as a result and was just kind of more along the lines of, well, fine, I guess I'm on the outside then. But then, the way she always said it is, well, fine, I guess Michelle and I are all on the outside then. So it seemed like they were really not completely on the same page. Now, I'm not saying they weren't close. I mean, they clearly were, but it was, there seemed to be a mismatch in terms of quite how close they were strategically.
Right, and all I'm saying is I think that is more recent than a total thing, because it was either last episode or the episode before where whenever they were talking about Julia and Michelle was really upset, and she's like, I don't want them to be targeting my closest ally.
Oh, that was this time too. So, I mean, she did say that. So, I mean, I'm only talking about this episode anyway. I don't mean previously. I just meant in this episode.
I thought you were implying that like this had been a continuous thing.
Okay, yeah, I apologize then if that was unclear. What I only meant was this time, Julia seemed to just take for granted that Michelle was going to do whatever Julia wanted to do. Not like in I'm using her sense, but just in the assumption that they were both on the same page when it seemed like they really weren't. Doesn't mean that they didn't have a close alliance. It meant that Michelle was actually pursuing a different strategy than Julia was, but Julia just assumed that Michelle was going to follow her with whatever she wanted to do.
Yes, that makes sense. Yep.
So that was definitely a development this time, although it may have been building. We don't know. But in any case, she's saying, and I even had it in my notes at this early in the episode of saying, now Michelle and I have gone down a few notches, And she seems pretty determined to speak for Michelle. Not obvious if Michelle actually feels the same way. But now we have, setting the stage for the new status quo, and it's the Aubrey, Sydney, Joe, Ty alliance planning to target Jason next. And Ty seems really pleased with the idea that if they have the numbers now, maybe they can just play everything above board from here on out. They don't have to do any more blindsides, which is a bit naive, but it's pretty in keeping with what we know of his character so far.
Yeah, I mean, it is factual if you make the assumption that that's who wants to be at the end.
Yeah.
But,
oh, right. Yeah, it's the difference in playing. Yeah, Ty is just not kind of constitutionally suited to playing a cutthroat sort of game like that. You know what I mean? Like, I think he really has difficulty thinking of it beyond, I'm picking my friends and we're going to go to the end together, and I'm going to pretend I don't really understand what happens after that.
yeah.
And I mean, I think he knows really, he just kind of doesn't like that part, and so he avoids thinking about it.
Well, yeah, especially because the whole decision-making process this time was like, who do I want to play with?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to play with Scott and Jason. I want to play with them. So, of course, he's going to carry that out in his mind as I'm going to play with them until the end part.
Yeah,
and we'll be all three tie.
Right. He wants... So given that part of why he switched was he didn't like the way they played, he wants to make sure that his new group is going to play the way he hopes that they would. Which is not underhanded. It's good sportsmanship, and people can be nice to each other even if they're in opposition, that sort of thing. But Ty is feeling a little bit bad about having lied to Jason. And I thought this was a really interesting sequence. Because on the one hand, I thought Ty's apology was actually really well phrased and well handled to a degree that it was better than I kind of even expected. Just because, I like a lot of things about Ty, but I wouldn't necessarily always call him eloquent or easily able to communicate a very narrow, targeted message.
Right.
You know what I mean? Which is to say, I feel bad on a personal level for having had to lie to you because I do like and respect you, but I needed to do it for my game, and I hope that you can respect that. And yet he just managed to say exactly that, and in a way that I came across to me as 100% sincere. Because it was.
Because it was, yeah.
Yeah. And I thought it was interesting at that point, and I have actually in my notes, Jason is pretty understanding about the strategy. He doesn't seem to be taking it personally at all. And then we cut to his confessional and saying, yep, I was just making sure that they didn't realize how mad I actually was because I'm really pissed and I want revenge. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, good job pretending then. I didn't realize. What did you think during that conversation?
I mean, I guess it's the same as what you thought. I thought that Ty was genuine and Jason handled himself really well. I didn't really have anything more than that.
So this is also where we get a little bit more of Mark the Chicken and this anxiety-inducing sequence where Mark comes up while Ty and Jason are talking, and then Ty kind of goes, oh, Mark, haha, I was actually a little worried, Jason, that you might try to hurt Mark in revenge or something. Haha. I hope I didn't just give you that idea. Jason's like, oh no, I would never. And then later it's like, oh, I'm pretty pissed. But it seems like he doesn't seem determined to do that. This whole idea of sabotaging the camp seems to be gone by the wayside at this point. Which is good. I just, we talked about that in depth, but I was just glad to see that wasn't making a reappearance. But so that brings us to the reward challenge. They're competing for a helicopter tour plus picnic with fried chicken. This was something that Dalton Ross mentioned in his recap, but let me run it by you and see what you thought about it, which is why last time when they had an even number of people, did they choose an individual based challenge, whereas this time when they have an odd number of people, did they pick a challenge where they have to split everybody into pairs and someone has to be left out?
Maybe, I mean, that might be by design.
Yeah. Like they think it's more interesting if someone gets left out?
Yeah, because I don't know, I didn't know, but they couldn't. This wasn't one of those ones where they got to like choose a group to root for, right? They were just out.
Right. Yeah, he was just out. Now,
I guess I don't understand. Yeah, you're right. I don't know.
I think when Sydney and Michelle got to pick one person, they would have been able to pick Jason, but he didn't get to. It wasn't like the previous challenge where he got to like bet on one side or the other.
Right.
I mean, I don't think it's a big deal either way. It's just an interesting question.
Yeah.
So in any case, the pairs are Joe and Ty together, Julia and Aubrey together, and Michelle and Sydney together with Jason sitting out. It's a fairly straightforward challenge. I mean, obstacles and, one tribe or another, or one pair or another will pull ahead, but then everybody, ties up towards the end with the ring toss. One of the things I was noticed during the ring toss portion is just, it's interesting how if, for example, your first throw sets the hook swinging, you are allowed to, when you go to recover your rings, to stop it from swinging, make it stationary again. But I wonder if, for example, if your first throw didn't hook but sent it swinging back and forth to the point that it would be really hard to try to make it with your next throws, would you be able to go up and stop it before throwing your next ring, or would you have to throw all three first, do you think?
I think you had to complete your throws before you could do it. So maybe if you wanted to do that, you could just throw the other two real quick and then run over there.
Yeah, I suppose that's not difficult. But I actually had that question about whether they were allowed to make it, to make it stop swinging when they went up there. But then they actually showed that happening once. When I don't remember who it was, but they showed someone when they had went to pick up the rings that had missed, showed them grabbing the hook and making it hold still. But just having it be on that swinging hook was kind of a neat idea. Made the whole thing, because as opposed to a ring toss where the hook is steady, this one, it has that wobble to it.
Right.
Where, if you hit it and it's not just landing right on, could send it jostling around, which could change the way you might want to have it landing. I don't know. My guess is that they didn't really have enough finesse with those rings for it to make that much of a difference strategically. But I still thought it was interesting. Both Sydney and Joe seem to actually be really good at throwing the rings. But ultimately, Sydney and Michelle are the winners. And they are able to pick one person to come with them, and they pick Aubrey because she had not gone on any food rewards. Now, I think that that was just fortuitous in the sense that I think, Sydney would be interested in taking Aubrey, since I think out of, the various pairs left, those two seem pretty close.
Yep.
And so I think Sydney might want to take Aubrey anyway. And then certainly from Michelle's perspective, being able, given that she seems to want to get back in with that group, being able to go on the reward with Sydney and Aubrey is like ideal. It's like she couldn't have picked a better two people to go on the reward with.
Well, and they almost like said it at the same time. Like they were both clearly thinking the same thing. So
yeah, they picked very quickly.
Yeah.
So at the reward, we have Michelle confirming that, yeah, I'm close with Julia. I've worked with Julia. And the way she's saying it is like she's aware that Aubrey and Sydney are not necessarily Julia fans. But Michelle seems to be saying, I want it really clear to you guys that I want to work with you guys. I trust you guys. I hope that you'll trust me. And then she seems to believe that they have accepted her back. And honestly, why wouldn't they? I mean, they have no motive to tell her anything other than that, even if it wasn't true. You know what I mean? It's like, at that point, you want her to keep voting with you, even if you are planning to target her. And in fact, they do discuss exactly that when Michelle is away for a moment. Is Sydney and Aubrey just kind of say, so you think we should target Michelle? What do you think? But I got the impression during that conversation that it was really just along the lines of, well, when you're deciding what your next move is, you really kind of just think through all of the available options. It seemed like they discarded voting out Michelle this time pretty quickly, just because, at this point, it's like she hasn't really made any big moves and she seems eager to cooperate with you. Why would you get rid of that person over someone who's plotting against you?
Right. Michelle doesn't make any sense at this point until,
Yeah. I mean, the thought that really kind of takes Michelle even off the table is like, so Jason and Julia are the ones that are on the outs. But then if you were going to go to someone besides them, it's probably Ty that they want to try to do something about, because Sydney especially is saying, we don't want to go to the end with no Ty. Or, does the double, triple, negative, or whatever it was that she said. The clear implication being we don't want to go to the end with Ty. Which makes perfect sense. And we'll have to talk about the strategy of Sydney and Michelle choosing not to vote for Ty in this plan. But we'll get more to that later, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so they talk about the idea of, well, it's a tricky balance. Well, maybe we want to use Ty for now, but we have to get rid of him eventually. And Michelle would be somewhat an additional number that could be willing to help us do that when we want to. So all the more reason that that's not who we want to target right now. Meanwhile, back at camp, Julia and Jason commiserate being on the outside. I thought it was interesting that, maybe there's some real truth to it anyway, but it also seemed like the way it felt to me in the episode was that Jason was pretty definitively on the outside, but it seemed almost like Julia kind of put herself there. Like they were not necessarily, like nobody else necessarily thought of her as much on the outside as Jason was until she was acting that way.
Correct.
That's certainly how I perceived it. You agree?
Oh yeah. Yeah. She wasn't on the outs until she was actively playing both sides and kind of, but to be fair to her, she was in a position where, while this isn't the only thing that she could have done, she had to make some sort of decision to do something different. Because if she had just played along with them, yeah, she wouldn't be on the outs, but she certainly wouldn't be in the core piece of it. So, while she may have, and again, we talked about this a lot in her whole handling of it, and I think we sort of came to the agreement that maybe this wasn't the best way to handle it, but that she was right to try to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, she is on the outs because of her choice, but I still go back to she had to make some sort of choice, and it didn't work out for her. And most of us could foresee that it wasn't the best move, not just in hindsight. Like, we could say, watching it, this is not really the way you should be playing this.
Right.
But, either way, had she played it smoother and had still made the decision to work the other way, then she would still be on the outs right now. So, yeah. Well,
so I guess I was thinking, like, not even just in the broader scheme, but even just starting from the beginning of this episode, it seemed at the beginning that it was still more of a case that Julia and Michelle were left out of the plan to get rid of Scott, but it was not necessarily, like, from Sydney and Aubrey and Ty's perspective, it wasn't necessarily that Julia was with Jason on the outside as much as she was the person we couldn't count on for sure, and so we didn't tell. But until in this episode, Julia started just spending all her time with Jason, I think. And maybe she did that because she was still thinking of herself and Michelle as a unit, which then with Jason made 3 of 7, which is a reasonable faction. And maybe you do something with that, like if you can get one more person, right? As opposed to the idea of I don't feel like they had necessarily considered her on the other side as much as on the bottom of their side. And it was really her that kind of made it more clear that she was on the other side.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not really criticizing.
If you're on the bottom of that side, then you need to try to make something happen that's different. And if you feel like you have a strong ally, and I think it also showcases like Michelle's maturity versus Julia's, in the fact that they both entered the situation from the same spot. Mm-hmm. And Michelle says, you know what? I'm going to work with this majority over here and wait until there's a more opportune time to deal with this. And Julia says, oh no, we're on the outs. So we need to figure out what we're going to do to, get back into
turn the tables.
Turn the tables. Yeah, so she was just much more reactive, whereas Michelle kind of was a little bit more thoughtful.
Yeah.
And so you are correct, but I think there's a little bit, more to it to show that, it's not that it shows the decision-making difference between what Michelle did and what Julia did, because they did enter as a unit. At the end, they clearly were not a unit, which you identified. Like, Julia kept thinking they were. Michelle was just, like, I think sort of hit on at the beginning, Michelle was distancing herself from it, even though she was her ally, because she was developing and maturing a different set of relationships, and Julia was we've got to flip the tables here,
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe that would have played out differently if they weren't separated by the results of the reward challenge.
But that's why they have that stuff.
Yeah. And I should add too here that although I've been critical of Julia in the past, in the sense that, as we've discussed, I think some of her previous moves were not necessarily terrible in concept, but they weren't always executed with finesse. But I liked that she was doing things. She was not just passively riding along. And what I'll say in this episode is that even though it didn't work out, it was a good plan, and it absolutely could have worked. I mean, she only went home just because, Sydney and Michelle decided not to go with their plan, but they could have decided to go the other way. And in fact, I thought that they were going to. So I thought she had a good plan this time that didn't work because of the other players making a different decision, but it could have worked. And I thought it was probably her best play given where she was starting the episode.
Yes. So I thought a lot about this, and, well, not in detail enough, but when I was reflecting on it, I guess I don't say I thought a lot about it. Like I actually like sketched out numbers and stuff like that, just kind of reflecting on it, and as to why they didn't choose that. Like why does it make sense for them to stay put right now when they had that opportunity? And I'm starting to feel like that might have been the right thing to do because, you get out, one of them, and you still have now somebody who's on the outs. You still have Tai that you want to get, and you're a core 3, so you can make a decision next time because you've now got someone that needs to work with you if you want to go for Tai or try to do something with that idol. Or you just have an expendable person, as opposed to risking all of it this time and having to potentially sacrifice somebody, all that kind of stuff, That's kind of where I landed. I was like, that makes sense, I guess, in why upset that, because especially, like, after Tai just did you that huge favor, too, like, he's going to be a jury member.
Yeah.
So is this the right time to do that to him? When he's super nervous already, like...
I think you're right that I think that was probably the thing that ultimately made the decision for them, is just the point of like, this time after Tai just helped us and he's a super nice guy and everybody likes him, is this now the time where we want to distinguish our gameplay by stabbing him in the back immediately after he helped us?
Right.
That's not going to make anybody happy with us.
Especially, when the whole point of him helping was that he wanted to play with the right people. He wanted to be with people that respected him and liked him, and then you're going to go and be like, haha, we tricked you. No one respects and likes anybody in this game.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just, even from the not getting his vote or other people's votes because they thought it would just make you feel kind of
to use a politics term, the optics are bad.
The optics are bad, and especially when there is opportunity. There's going to be opportunities still. Like, at some point, his stuff runs out, even if you don't ever vote for it. Yes, I mean, it runs out to the point where he could potentially just win immunity out, but even if you never have a good opportunity to flush his idol or get his idol, like, at some point he has to use it and just... And when you look at him, he's not the kind of guy where you're like, okay, whatever it is at 5 or 4 or whatever the last time they can use it.
Yeah.
It's not like he's exactly a guy that you're like, oh, fuck, we got to get rid of him before then. Like, you could let him get to that.
Yeah.
And then just cut him out of the final 3 if he doesn't win immunity.
Well, right. And especially if everybody's kind of on the same page in that last vote, there can be this... it doesn't have to be a stab in the back blindside. It can be, Tai, we love you, buddy, but if we let you get to the end, you're going to win. So this is a vote for total respect, and we understand that she'll be disappointed, but, we're trying to win the game too. and that way, it's not a betrayal in the same way. So I think you're right that that's probably why they made the decision they did. But I thought it was really interesting because it's a legitimate tough decision. You know what I mean? It's like you could really make a case for either direction.
Well, and that's why when you said there's a lot of interesting things to talk about with this episode, that this is one that I fell on because this shows, we call it out a lot, about the social dynamics of this. This shows that it's not just what makes the most sense and who you have relationships with and who do you trick into doing what. Like, sometimes there's just this human element of, you know what, that's just not a good thing to do. So we're going to find, it's almost like the reverse of the, like, when you create strategy so you can do what you want to do. Like, well, not the reverse. It's the more positive version of it.
Yeah.
Like, well, we know we should get rid of him, but we kind of don't want to right now because he just helped us.
Mm-hmm.
So let's make sure that aligns. Let's spin that into our strategy. Whereas if you looked at this with no personalities involved, and just the situation of, if you just rated it with quantitative things for like who was more likely to win votes and who had advantages and things like that, then you can make a really good case that he's the person you should get rid of, because
Mm-hmm.
the other people aren't likely to win. You can get rid of them next time. He has all these advantages and is the most likely to win.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a good opportunity to get that to happen. Yeah, you definitely could make a case for that.
Mm-hmm.
But
I thought that was the decision they were going to make. I really thought that was what was going to happen.
Well, and that's where it comes down to us as viewers watching it through the plane here, that while we're still emotionally invested in them, it's a little bit easier for us to like separate ourselves for a week, watch it, and say, and be able to think through and say, oh man, this is really a good opportunity to do that. Whereas if
we're less personally invested.
Right, when you're personally invested and somebody just did you a huge favor, are you really going to be like, I mean, it's the right thing to do. Let's just get rid of him. Yeah.
Well, and not only that, but he's super nice. So this idea of like, I'm going to do what feels like a mean thing to a super nice guy who doesn't see it coming, it feels shitty.
Right. And yeah, a super nice guy who just helped us out because he's a super nice guy. Like, he only did it because he wants to continue to be a super nice guy and not be a shitty guy. And then we're going to go do something shitty to him. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there is sound strategy in it. Like this.
And so, to be sure, Julia's plan to pitch that as a strategy, I think, was the right play for her. And it just, it didn't work out because it relied on other people siding with you. But I think it was the best thing that she could have gone with it. She played it well for all that. Like I said, I actually thought that it was going to work.
Yep.
But in any case, as Julia and Jason are talking, Julia and they both seem pretty convinced that, well, of course we have Michelle, but we need a fourth. And so who would that be? Well, they know Joe won't work with them, so they're pretty much don't even want to try him. Aubrey is almost as, rigid, and it's almost like Aubrey's really kind of the leader of the other faction that they're trying to overturn. So like at that point, what are you gaining? She's not going to side with you because the whole point is that you're working against her.
Right. Your whole point of getting rid of Ty is to take one of her numbers away.
Yeah. So Sydney is really the only one left. And as we had already seen in that episode, Sydney was also the one that seemed most determined that they can't go to the end with Ty. And so they're thinking, well, if they can get Sydney and Michelle's vote, that'll be 4. And Jason is making, he's preaching to a choir of Julia in this case, of basically saying, this is how we will. So he's practicing the sell on Julia, who's already convinced, kind of talking through how they're going to pitch it to Sydney, right? Which is to say, look, if the 4 of us vote for Ty and he plays his idol, then the idol's out of the game, and one of us, and he's counting himself, Julia and Michelle as the us there, still goes home just like they would have. And now the idol's gone. Or if he doesn't play the idol, then he's out altogether. And so I can see that being an appealing possible case. And as we discussed, I mean, I think ultimately the only reason they didn't decide to do that is because if nothing else, you could have let just enough of that plan slip that maybe Ty's spooked enough to play his idol. And that way, you get to keep Ty in the game. But, or even, for example, what about the idea of getting him spooked enough to play his idol and then not voting with them? That way you don't even have to betray Ty, except by leading him to believe that he needs to play his idol.
Yeah.
Well, and this just ties in again, just because it's all of a piece, is that at the end, Ty asks Aubrey, should I play my idol?
Right. That's where I was about to go.
She could have said, yeah. So go ahead.
Well, I was thinking a lot about this. Like, well, the ones that actually want Ty off, I don't know that. Yes, wow. It felt like the backup was he plays his idol. So the whole getting him spooked thing, I'm not sure that that's the right play, because now you got a spook Ty who you made waste his idol and is now going to be super skittish because he has no confidence because he no longer has he has his one advantage, but he is going to be like he would be a wreck. So if you spooked him into doing that. So I'm not sure that's the right play, especially if he's actually the one you want to get rid of, So it doesn't make sense for them. But then Aubrey I almost felt like it should be the other way. Like, he just came over to your side and you're sort of dismissive of him. Like, I mean, I think you're good, but go with your gut. Like, I don't know. I just felt like she should have been more like, she's the one that she should have been the one that, like, she could have said it so much different. She could have been like, Ty, I'm with you, and I think our group is good, but you just never know. Maybe you should play it. And then she eliminates that power, and now she's even more in control.
Yeah.
She should have reaffirmed her connection with him and said, but I don't know what they're going to do, Ty. Like, which I think is what she was trying to do, but she just delivered it so poorly.
I got the impression that she was allowing for the possibility of being wrong, but trying to reassure him that he didn't need to play it, as opposed to having the balance be on the other side, which is to say, I don't know for sure, and I'm definitely with you. I mean, because first of all, if she wasn't with him, she would not want him to play it. Right? So the only reason that she would ever argue that he should play it is if she's with him.
Right. So I feel like she was trying to argue that he should play it, but she didn't deliver it very well. She's like, I mean, I think you're good, but go with your gut. Like, I think that was what she was trying to say, was like, oh yeah, you should. Yeah.
See, I read it differently. I read it as, first of all, I don't even know. I'm not sure whether it even occurred to her in the moment that she had an opportunity to make him play his idol, whether he needed to or not. Because I think that the way that she has managed to connect with Ty and the way that she is thinking of their relationship at this point in the game is that their connection is founded on, like, being honest with each other and having that emotional connection. And so I think that she was literally like a friend giving another friend advice in that moment. He has a tricky decision to make, and she's not sure what the answer is, because it's possible that something has gone wrong and it will be bad and she doesn't know. So she doesn't want to promise that it'll be okay, because she can't know that. And so she's saying, I think you're good, but if, I'm not going to tell you not to play it because it's you that's on the line. That's what it felt like to me. But at the same time, if that is what it is, it's potentially a missed opportunity, because she could have gotten the idol out of the way. All it would have taken is just a slight shift in the way she presented it, and there's still no betrayal there. Although you could argue that if she cynically tried to present it in a way to make him play his idol when she didn't think he needed to, it's kind of a betrayal, but it's a soft betrayal, you know? But, you know, she could have leaned more in the direction of urging him to play it. And then that piece would be off the table.
Yeah.
But the way I read it in the moment, or at least, I mean, it's hard to know for sure because we can't, you know, see into their heads. But that was kind of how I interpreted her response in the moment, was that it really was in the moment, he's asking her a question and she doesn't know for sure one way or the other. Should he play it? Should he not? I think she sincerely wanted him to stay in the game. And it seemed like she even valued the idea of him having the idol still and not having to give it up if he didn't need to. Yeah. Because she had this emotional connection with him and wanted what was best for him in that moment. That's how I read it, but it's hard to know for sure. You know, this is one of those cases where you kind of have to read between the lines, and we don't have perfect information.
Right. The other thing that I was sort of thinking about in this episode, you know, there's so much focus on his idol that he's not even really, like, thinking about his extra vote. Mm-hmm. And what's going to end up happening is he's going to end up at a point where it's like his last chance to use it, and it's going to be totally ineffectual, and continue to prove that the extra vote is ineffectual.
Yeah.
But it makes it shows what a tricky thing that is, because you really, in order to use it correctly, you really have to know where all the votes are, and it has to be the right situation. Mm-hmm. And I know you kind of talked about that when it came out, but I just really started thinking about that, like, because most of the time you either don't know what's happening, and that's why you end up where you're at, or you know what's happening, but there are so many people against you that one extra vote doesn't do you any good. Mm-hmm. Like, you almost have to be so manipulative that you get into one of those situations where, like, people are trying to flush an idol or something like that, and you throw it so that an idol doesn't have to get flushed. But it's super complicated because you have to know exactly and trust exactly how it's all going to work, or it just is this extra thing.
Right. I mean, it is super tricky. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't cases where it would work. Like, for example, if we imagine that Jason had it this time, you know, they can't count on Sydney, but if he thinks that he's definitely got Julia, and Julia is already potentially can pull a conflicted Michelle over with the additional promise of, we don't even need to get one of them because we have this extra vote that we can make it a tie. Or potentially even better. And so that would be a case, for example, where it would be a good play. Yes. And I mean, I think a big part too, like Michelle's decision, it's hard to know whether it might well be that she might have been more open to the plan with Jason and Julia, except that if Sydney was not, then that's it. You know, it's like, what else? It's a waste of time, and it's throwing your vote away if you try to still go with it if Sydney's not on board.
Right, which is why it makes sense for her to have, you know, really bonded with Sydney and Aubrey at that retreat, is so that you can find out in a situation like this.
Yeah. If
there's a chance to flip somebody, they're honest with you as to whether or not that can happen. Be like, so Sydney's like, no, I can't do that to Ty right after he helped us. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll vote with you. You know, but you need her to be able to tell you that. Whereas
Right.
Julia, nobody can tell her that, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Julia, they're only going to tell her that, yeah, it's like, oh, yeah, we're with you. We're on board. That's a good idea. You shouldn't make any other plans. But yeah, but in that case, for example, if we're in the minority alliance of Jason, Julia, and Michelle, and maybe Michelle's wavering, but you lure her back with the idea of, well, we don't need Sydney because we have this extra vote, and they're not expecting it.
True. Ty, however, it feels like is not even considering how to use it. He just keeps it as a safety net, as, I have to advantages.
Yeah, he's thinking of it like he thinks of the idol, which is that you don't play it until you absolutely have to, but that's a recipe for it just not working out.
Yeah.
Yeah. But at the same time, I mean, I think it's an incredibly difficult advantage to make proper use of. And Ty, as much as I like the guy, is not, I think, the sharpest strategic thinker in the game.
No, he's going to have a very tough time winning this game.
I think it depends a lot on who he's there with. I think if he's up there with Aubrey or Sydney, I think they can out-talk him. Because as nice as he is, I think Sydney was right in tribal council this time, which is to say,
I don't know that he makes it, is my point.
What?
I don't think he makes it.
Well, no, I think they're going to try to take him out before that. I agree. I'm thinking just end game. Although, one thing that we should also consider, this is something, and I hadn't done the math on, but Dalton Ross points it out in his recap. Boy, he writes some good recaps. He points out, we just finished this episode with 6 players left in the game. 3 episodes remaining. The first episode will go to 5. Next episode will go to 4. And that means the finale will start with 4. We're looking at a final 2?
Maybe.
Yeah, could be. So that's another wrinkle to consider. But certainly I agree with you that everybody but Ty should be trying to get Ty out before it's at 3.
Yes.
And we'll have to see too if that affects when the last time those idols and stuff can be used. Ooh, what if the extra vote could be used all the way to the end? That would be interesting.
I don't think it can, but I'm not positive.
I don't think they've said one way or the other, but or at least this time. But I think you're right that it makes the most sense that it would work like the idols do, which is that you can't use it in what would be the last vote to get to the finals. You can't use it then, but you can use it the time before that.
Right.
So, for example, if there's going to be a final 3, you can't use it to get from 4 to 3, but you could use it to get from 5 to 4.
But what might be even more interesting is if you can't use it to get to 4 to 3, but then there's still another vote to get to 2.
Mm-hmm.
So
so that's what I'm saying is that if it's a final 2, maybe you can actually use that idol or that extra vote one tribal council further than we might have otherwise expected.
Well, yes, but what I'm saying is it would be even funny, as interesting if it was still the same in that we're going to a final 2, but you can only use it at 4 or at 5 or whatever. You can't. Yeah, I guess it's at 5 that you have to use it.
5 going to 4 is
5 going to 4, right? So it's still set up where you can only use it at 5 going to 4, and then you find out that you still have to make it through another. So you don't just have to get through 1 vote; you have to get through 2 without your advantages.
Yeah.
As opposed to letting it last longer, which is what you're saying, which would also be interesting. I think it'd be interesting either way.
I'm just thinking that the extra vote makes more and more of a difference the fewer people there are remaining.
Yes.
But anyway, we've been talking a lot about the endgame stuff. We didn't actually finish the play-by-play because
Okay.
we didn't even get to the immunity challenge, although we were just about there. The last note I had before the immunity challenge was Julia expressing that as soon as Ty is gone, we're going to eat Mark.
Yeah.
Can't wait, she says. And she got to eat a different chicken instead, presumably. So in any case, the immunity challenge with a water obstacle and then a memory puzzle, having to memorize the animals and the numbers, and presumably the best strategy would be to try to have some sort of a mnemonic device, but still that's really tricky, especially with how far they had to run in between and through the water and climbing over the thing. It would be very easy to forget, which is exactly why the challenge is difficult.
Well, and they made sure to set them up where it wasn't an easy mnemonic device. Like I kind of played along at home, and they didn't have any of the same sounds. They didn't rhyme. They didn't start with the same letters.
Mm-hmm.
You really would have had to have created something from scratch.
Well, you could do the like the story, the narrative style, where it's kind of like the snake brought 7 pies to the picnic, and the bear had 3 of them, and then the chicken had 4. That sort of thing.
Right.
Because I think people can sometimes remember the details of a story like that better than the abstract numbers or pairings.
Right.
But at the same time, still very difficult, and all the more impressive for Michelle if she, as she so claimed, that she had memorized all 12 of them. That's pretty good.
What was the by the bell thing? Mavemshnup?
What?
You don't remember that?
No.
How to memorize the planets?
Okay. I don't remember that version of it.
It was from Saved by the Bell. It was like a joke.
Oh, okay.
Because they were like coming up with a mnemonic device. And it's like, just remember Mavemshnup.
Yeah.
Because it's, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Mavem.
Yeah. Well, because there's the more classic one is like my very educated mother just served us 9 pies.
Yeah.
Although that one gets tricky with Pluto's, designation. But anyway, yeah, November. No.
Yeah, the tricky one.
Yeah. Well, that's obviously the joke, is that you've got a hard word to say that makes no sense. How is that easier to remember?
But yeah, I still remember it. So.
Well, there you go. But yeah, so I thought it was also interesting, the element where, and it was good challenge design, I think, that even though there's 12 numbers and symbols to look at to begin with, only 5 of them actually matter. But you don't know which 5 until you've gone back there once. But that means if you don't solve it the first time, it's easier the second time because you know which 5. But even still, you still have to remember which 5. You have to remember which 5 to go out there and then remember the numbers for them coming back. But at least you're not dealing with 12. And so that way it doesn't last forever.
Right.
But then, of course, you get someone like Michelle who successfully memorizes all 12 the first go and then doesn't have to go back at all.
Yeah, I think they were counting on everyone having to go back and whoever could come back and solve it the second time. And whoever was quick enough in doing that.
Yeah.
And I honestly was thinking that would be my strategy, is get as much as I can. Get 5 or 7 of them, ones that you'll remember.
Yeah. But
and go back, figure out which you need, and you'll still have the 5 or 7 in the bank of your memory. You'll figure out what you need. You'll be able to pull the ones that you'll be able to remember, the couple that you saved a little bit better, and then go back and get them. But the fact, like you said, Michelle solved it and won, so you can't beat that, you know.
Technically, Julia did too. She didn't claim to have memorized all 12. I think she got lucky in terms of she remembered the 5 that she needed. But both of them got their key on the first try.
That's true.
It's still incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
I think you're right that the expectation was probably that nobody would get it on the first try. So in any case, though, Michelle wins with blindsided, which is an excellent word for the word puzzle to be. So we have yet another Jason confessional talking about, here, let me explain the exact situation that we are in right now, which is that I'm on the outside, Julia's with me, and we need Michelle and Sydney to join in on the tie vote, or else I'm out. Except that, of course, we know he's wrong in the sense that they're kind of rightly saying, why do we need to get Jason out now? He's totally defanged. He can't do anything now.
Yep.
And they're kind of right. It's like, we don't have to worry about taking him to the end. He's not likely to be winning any of these challenges or anything. We don't think there's any more idols in play. We don't have to take him out.
No.
So, but at the same time, he otherwise sums up the current situation pretty clearly. And so we actually have Aubrey discuss that a little bit, the idea that, well, and I like too that she kind of approaches this with her group in like she's sort of taking a leadership role, like with Sydney kind of as like her second in command, just as it's sort of presented. But at the same time, it's very democratic of like, she's not coming to them and saying, look, everybody, this is how it is. It's more like, okay, guys, here's our choices. Let's talk about it. You know, so I thought that she handled that pretty well. It's like, okay, well, Jason's an easy vote because we don't like him, but is that the right strategic move? And then they kind of narrow it down. It seems like, well, it's him or Julia is who it needs to be. But this is where they do have at least a potential danger that they don't seem to fully realize, which is that while they correctly, I think, decide that Julia is a better person to get out right now from their perspective, switching the vote to Julia instead of Jason does at least somewhat jeopardize their ability to count on Michelle's vote.
Yes.
And that is actually a big part of why I think that Michelle may have still been open to going with Julia and Jason if she thought Sydney would too. But if Sydney doesn't also, then it's pointless.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think Michelle
kind of talk through that.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to be dismissive. I was just trying to think. I was like, you know what? I feel like I've said everything that I feel like I want to say on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we kind of we talked through a lot of that stuff already. We did have a little bit of Sydney being a little bit cavalier, maybe, with the idea of, we'll tell Jason and Julia that I'm going with the tie thing so that they don't screw around. And she seemed in that moment like when I was watching her in that moment, I was thinking that she seemed pretty clear that she wasn't going to do that. And maybe she was so certain that she didn't fully account for Ty being uncomfortable that anyone's even talking about voting for him. Because he did seem anxious about it, although not anxious enough to play his idol.
No.
And then, so I think that pretty much takes us to the tribal council. And I don't know if you noticed it, but I was very amused with Scott's melodramatic coming into tribal council with his "I'm mad at you guys" pouty expression. That seemed very put on to me. You know what I mean? It's just like jury members will do that sometimes. You know what I mean? It's like you get the sense that they're maybe not necessarily all that mad, but they want to come in on the jury like very stern, like, you guys trouble.
But to be fair to him, like, he was a professional performer, essentially. And he played that game a lot. Like, he was a talented basketball player, but he put on the show of the NBA. So he's kind of got that ham in him.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm not criticizing. I was amused.
Yeah.
That he just comes in and sits down.
It's very genuine from him. It's genuinely over the top.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. That's all
No, I buy that completely. Yeah. But like, just, you know, he just sits down with this sort of glare. I thought that was fun. Lots of talk in the tribal council that made me think that Michelle and Sydney were gonna go with Ty. Especially Michelle said a lot of things suggesting that that's what, you know, she talked about. You got to go with your gut. If something doesn't feel right, you know, you got to make big moves so you have something to talk about. And then ultimately she did not make a big move unless you kind of count not making a terrible mistake as a big move. I just mean, if
going back to that, maybe with them too, it was about trying to just put enough nervousness without like blatantly like putting it out there. Since they weren't going to vote, it goes back to what you were saying. They weren't voting.
Oh, yeah. So maybe Aubrey wasn't in on that, but maybe Michelle and Sydney were thinking like, and if Ty is spooked enough to play his idol, maybe that's for the best.
Maybe that was their play, and it's like, okay, we're not going to get rid of, like, that didn't even click because I was thinking of some of the bigger pieces of it. But them two, that makes sense for. Because they're like, it goes back to what you're saying. They're voting with Ty. They're not, so they can come out of it and say, "Oh, I mean, as long as you don't say like, oh, we're all gonna vote for Ty if he doesn't play his idol." You know,
it's so delicate though because he can't be seen as doing it that way deliberately.
And that's why it comes back, and I'm like, they did get him almost nervous enough to do it.
Yeah, he whispered in Aubrey's ear about it.
Yeah, and had he not done that, he probably plays it. So now I'm starting to go, it's all clicking together. I don't know why that didn't come together before. Like that, I bet that's exactly that. Michelle and Sydney were definitely, they bought into the idea. They didn't want to do it because it's a shitty thing to do. Yeah. But what they said is, well, we could still, if we could get Ty to play his idol when we don't vote for him and Julia still goes home, that's a pretty good situation for us.
Well, it's certainly true that you can't eat your cake and have it too. I reversed it because it makes no sense the other way. You can perhaps have a piece of cake and still have the rest of the cake.
Yes.
You can get him to play his idol without having to backstab him.
Right.
But yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it also explains why my sense from the tribal council was that they did seem to be leaning more in the direction of voting for Ty, and
hamming it up, trying to get without deliberately saying they weren't going to do it. They're just like, everything is so up in the air. Like if I had an idol, I think I'd feel a lot better if I played that. But not that I'm in trouble.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that Jason, I thought, considering the position he was in, I thought he played pretty well this episode. But he did have, I think, a fairly significant fumble where he's trying to make the case that you don't want to protect Ty. He's already flipped twice. You can't depend on him. And then Ty just says, well, I flipped on you guys because you and Scott were so close that I felt like you were going to turn on me. And I felt like I was the outsider in that relationship. And that's why it happened. And then Jason's like, well, but Aubrey and Joe are closer than me and Scott were. And everyone's like, What?
Yeah, like Joe's not close with anybody. Joe is like literally just like he's like an extra vote every time.
So
Like, he has literally no input on anything. He doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
He just takes himself out of challenges.
Although he is in his
He
70s.
is the extra vote advantage for Aubrey.
Yeah.
The little extra vote advantage.
Yeah. But yeah, so like obviously
it doesn't go away.
He and Aubrey have a connection, but at least certainly my perception is not they're super close. Meanwhile, we saw Jason and Scott talk about betraying Ty. We saw it happen. We know for a fact.
Yes.
And so, but what I just thought was amusing is how the idea of trying to portray Ty as a dishonest schemer blew up in his face because it's so transparently not true.
Yeah.
I thought that was great. Even that one betrayal that he did to you guys, he felt so bad about it that he came and apologized to you for it. So I thought that was, that particular exchange did not go the way Jason was hoping. But in any case, I also liked Sydney. I'm liking Sydney more and more as the season goes on, honestly. Both her and Aubrey, I think, have really solidified their gameplay in the last couple of episodes. And then I really...
a little bit more grounded now. Yeah. They were sort of shotgunning it for a while. And I think what bothered you and I is that they were blaming others for their shotgun approach when really they had the exact same one. And then once those people kind of got out of the mix, they got a little bit more grounded and they're thinking through it a little bit better. And I agree with you. I like them a lot better now. Yeah.
Well, and I really liked, too, the confidence in Sydney's demeanor when there's this discussion of, the real part of the game, which is you're sending people to the jury, but then you're going to have to count on their votes at the end. And are they going to hold a grudge if you're the one that sent them there? And I liked that she's just very matter of fact of just saying, I think that at this, stage of the game of Survivor, the jury is going to want to reward people who are playing the game well and not just hold personal grudges. And she's just very confident and matter of fact about it in a way that kind of can't. So not only is it, I think, probably largely true, that certainly the last couple of seasons have seemed to bear that out, but there's also just an element of a little bit of prospective shaming if they were planning to do something different than that. You know what I mean? It's kind of like when she's going to just lay it out straightforward like that, then someone who, like maybe Scott, who's mad at her for betraying the Braun tribe back when she did that, it's a little bit of a message of like, are you the guy who's not going to reward good gameplay just because you're mad? So I thought that was a really well handled thing, and it just showed a lot of poise and confidence, and it kind of it was appealing.
Yes.
Okay, so that brings us to the votes and Ty not playing his idol. We talked all about that. Michelle actually wipes away tears as Julia gets up to get her torch snuffed, which just kind of further lends credence to the idea that she maybe would have been more interested in going with them if she thought she could have gotten Sydney to agree.
Yes.
So Julia goes out, and I have to say that I had some criticism for her earlier in the season, but certainly now that her time in the game has come to a close, especially for how young she is, I really respect that she was a proactive player. She made some smart decisions. I thought she played this episode really well, especially just given that she was in kind of a tough spot. But she helped to pitch a plan that could have worked. It didn't, but that's the luck of the game sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yep.
I
All right.
agree.
So she was another player that my esteem for grew as the season progressed, especially since the first few episodes we really didn't even see anything from her. But next time, Jason is down and out, but then does the majority start to crumble? And I'm thinking, well, yeah, I mean, but they're down to 6 people now. It's kind of when that happens.
Yeah. And yeah, they're going to be starting to try to figure out who all they want to go to the end with and how to get people to where they need to be. So, yeah.
Well, yeah.
It starts to become every person for themselves.
Yeah, because especially given that Jason being on the outside is also a person that they don't especially want to get rid of because he's not a threat to take the victory away from anybody.
Yeah, he's a highly likely candidate for the final 3.
Mm-hmm. Because people will bring him along because,
yes,
it's unlikely that anyone else will want to give him the money.
Yeah, he will begin to see a lot of people wanting to work with him now.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it's in the best interest of these other people to do that. Yeah.
So, but that's part of how it works.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right.
All right. So I think that does it for this episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening and or watching. And we'll be back next week. Good night.